we are at the final panel session of the day, and what a fantastic panel we have here with us. We are going to be looking at the future now. So we've done a lot about where we've been, what are the issues are, where we currently are, what are the challenges that we're facing. And in this final session, this is your chance to ask any questions that you have about what might be coming over the next year, 5, 10 years as well. We are going to keep to that same format for our final panel. So I will do a quick introduction to our 4 speakers, but actually this is your last chance to put your questions to our speakers. So once you have heard a little bit, I will put a question to each of our speakers and then throw it over to you. So not only can you ask the speakers about anything that they say in their remarks, I didn't tell them this, you can ask them also any burning question that you have had for the whole day today that you haven't had a chance to ask. Now is your chance to ask it. I don't want you to go home thinking, I wish I had asked that, and I don't know the answer to that still. So please don't be shy in this session. This is your last opportunity to put your comments and questions to our panel. So we have with us here today, who you heard this morning if you were here right in the morning, we've got back, which is fantastic to have you back on stage, we've got Dominic Rochon, who is the Deputy Minister and Chief Information Officer of Canada. We have Scott Jones, who is the President of Shared Services Canada. We've got Paul Wagner, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Digital Service. And last but by no means least, we've got Stephen Karam, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of System Scope. So I am going to kick off. I think I'm going to change the order up a little bit. So Paul, I'm going to come to you first and say, in your strategic vision, so the strategic vision of the Canadian Digital Service, you reflect on the achievements of the digital service. It was created in 2017, I understand. And there's a call to action in that digital service, which is how can public servants work together on digital enablement? And we've discussed that in some of our sessions today. How optimistic are you that that call to action is going to be answered? And what do you see as being some of the biggest challenges facing the people that are in the room here in terms of that working better together?
So I got 42 minutes to answer that question, right?
Yes.
Is that what that means?
Yeah. No, you've got about 3 minutes.
3 minutes? Brilliant.
Question.
So one thing, and just maybe one small correction, this is not the future of digital service. That is, okay? So let's be very clear, all of you are. And I think, and I don't mean that being glib, but if you look at the Canadian Digital Service, the work that we put together and we've articulated around our strategy, thank you. I think, and I talk about breaking down silos, and too often we compare ourselves to Estonia, we compare ourselves to Ukraine. There's some great work obviously done in those countries. There's some great work being done in each of our organizations today, and as a country, I think one of our biggest challenges is how to coordinate that, right? So you have, in a previous chat, we were talking about pockets of awesomeness, and I'm sure, if there's folks here from Parks Canada, veterans, public work or PSPC, there's incredible amount of innovation and evolution that happens in those departments. I think as a government transformation, I think Ukraine, what they did is, as an example, incredible amount of transformation at a government level. That's very hard when you think about Canada. And especially if you start to think about some of the other jurisdictions in Canada, and so you think almost a little bit like the EU in terms of member states, and trying to do that coordination first within the Canadian federal government, and then beyond within some of the other jurisdictions. And so when I talk about breaking down silos, it's not about, I think, the work that we need to do from a digital perspective, because I think a lot of that is happening. I think, events like this where people get together and talk about, hey, how can we share data? What kind of user experience can we create? How can we create a better journey for someone that actually has to transact between our 2 departments? I think a lot of that happens at the working level. What I would challenge, and what I am challenging all of you, is to think about the things that are in your way, and don't put those aside, because it's easy to ignore that out of the equation, but then it stops you from being able to scale. And those things that are in your way, I think you need to work through. Don't let it hinder the ability to actually achieve an outcome, but also don't net it out of the equation. And I think some of those things are going to need to be dealt with at the highest level. Like a lot of times we talk and we say, well, our legislative process is this, it's going to take years to change legislation. In Estonia, as an example, and I had the privilege of meeting with some of their officials recently, they've changed legislation in a matter of weeks, not years. Now, smaller country, 1 million people, and they'll tell you, like, it's a very different environment than we have here, but I don't think that should limit our ambition around some of the big things that need to change, whether that's around the way we fund initiatives, the way that we adopt a product management philosophy, and I don't just mean us in the room, but everybody around us, because that's the only way those things are going to be successful.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, that point came up today, that we managed to do things differently during the pandemic, for example, and we should keep some of that kind of more entrepreneurial spirit maybe going forward as well. Thanks, Paul. So Scott, I'm going to come to you now. So Shared Services Canada is described as the IT backbone of the government of Canada. So my question to you is, what do you see as being the next steps on this kind of digital transformation journey, and how do you think it's going to transform the way that everybody in the room is going to be working, and also the skills that they're going to need going forward?
It's really interesting when I kind of look at the history of SSC. There are a lot of people who are still living 13 years ago and want to renegotiate that. It's time to look forward, and that's what I want to talk about here. Couple things. Number one, we're still behaving in some cases like it's 47 individual departments, and we're catering to them individually. And frankly, that's causing differentiation where it adds little value. In fact, it's adding a tremendous amount of friction inside of the government. So that needs to go. If you look at our roadmaps, I want any public servant to be able to go into any government location, to be able to work anywhere. And without barriers, without that problem that we all have, as soon as you leave your home, nothing works. That's got to stop. So we're starting to do that now. So first of all, anywhere, anytime, any location, you should be able to work. Bring people together from multiple departments, and there shouldn't be any barriers. Next thing I want to see is, I don't think any government user should have to lose their tech. And right now, when you move departments, you send everything back in, you get everything back again. That's silly. Like, why isn't this moving with you? Because then you go through the same fights. How do I configure it? Everything's a little different in every department. This is a meaningless differentiation. And what we should be differentiating on is service. What are we delivering? And that's what we need to start building up the foundations for that. Where the differentiation matters, which is service delivery. Now, whether that's internal services, and how we're dealing with our corporate applications, or whether it's external services we deliver to Canadians, that's where the differentiation matters. Not how am I configuring my zoning inside my network because I've decided I want to stick in 1999. It doesn't make any sense anymore. So that's what I see the future is. The future is we start behaving like a government rather than a group of loosely affiliated departments.
Yeah. Wow. Scott, that's the first room applause that we've had all day, so well done you. And I was going to say, that's probably music to many people's ears.
Okay.
Yeah, you can go now, And I've written here, which I really love, that's kind of setting a vision of eradicating meaningless differentiation. I really like that. I think that could be the strapline for next year's event, actually. So any question, be thinking about your questions and how you're going to make this happen, because it's good to have the vision, but you need to make sure that we can make that happen. So do be thinking about the questions you want to put to the panel. Dominic, I'm going to come to you now. So you need to get a round of applause as well. No pressure on this one. But so you've got kind of strategic oversight of digital transformation across the government. So I guess my question to you is, what do you think the milestones are going to be going forward on this digital transformation journey? And we had a session on how well placed, how well equipped do you think our public servants are to embrace digital transformation?
Oh, you saved the easy questions for me.
Easy question. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I'm going to riff off of both Paul and Scott in saying, it's hard to identify specific milestones, in that I think we're on a change journey. Really what you heard Paul and Scott refer to is the fact that we need to change the way that we work. We need to change our culture. And I'm not talking about a technological change. I'm talking about a change of behavior and a way that we actually understand how we work. Paul loves to reference the fact that, changing legislation, shouldn't have to take years. A lot easier said than done. As someone who sits at the center of government in a central agency, we set policies and rules, and people often look at us as if we're the barriers to innovation. But I think those policies, those guardrails, those supports that we offer up with strategies, et cetera, are absolutely necessary to help us navigate. It doesn't mean that they need to be barriers. It does mean that they need to be put in place for those milestones, so that as we move ultimately to try and offer citizens, Canadian citizens now are booking their restaurants through their iPhones. They're going to airports and they're able to scan in through their Apple Wallet their plane tickets. And then they interact with their federal government, and they're not able to do so in the same way. And so that's frustrating. We need to get to a place where we're offering the same type of service. How do we get there as quickly as possible? I think we've got lots to learn from our international friends. But at the end of the day, we can't forget that we need to do that responsibly. There are certain rules that we need to follow, so we'll be putting in place the right policies to help us get there. We need to make sure that we adopt the right skills. So digital skills is a significant issue. I think we're close, but we need to do much better in terms of making sure that we're understanding how those skills are brought to bear. And then we have to address the significant amount of technical debt that we've accumulated. We haven't done the right amount of investment in our infrastructure, in our technology, and we're paying for it. So now we're going to have limited resources. We need to do a better job of streamlining and identifying where we need to prioritize those resources, and ultimately then lead those three things together. And I'll just echo what you heard from the minister. I thought she was very passionate this morning in identifying that there's a policy piece, a technology piece, and a people piece. And if we get those things right, I'll add one other layer. If those of you walking around today where all the food was, you'll note that there was a significant presence of private sector people. We need to be able to also figure out a way of partnering with the private sector, who will always be leading edge compared to government when it comes to technology, and figuring out how we do that transparently, seamlessly, in order to be able to ultimately be able to get to the vision of better serving Canadians.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dominic. So what you're saying, there needs to be not just that shift in the technology and making sure everything's joined up, but shifting the mindset to make sure that we're meeting the expectations of the public in how they want their services delivered. And some of the things that you say people need to have to equip them to do this. So learning from others, which today is part of that, but doing it in a safe way, making sure we have the kind of the guardrails in place, having the right skills, and investing in our infrastructure and prioritizing our resources. So thanks so much, Dominic. And then you end there with the importance of partnerships with the private sector, that we're only going to do this if we all work together. So on that note, Stephen, you work across lots of different government departments and different agencies. From your experience, kind of what do you see as being the big things coming down the road, and how well do you think we're doing, and where do you think there's room for improvement?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm very impressed with the fact that these three gentlemen never use the term AI in their responses, which is great. But, and I'll just start by saying, like, the opinions I'm going to give are my own as someone from the private sector. One of the first things that we have to do, I like what Dominic was getting to, which is we are in a bit of a mind trap sometimes. And right now, like, the first thing I would say within government is that we need to start dropping the term digital in digital transformation, because it isn't just about digital. And what it does is it actually puts the onus on digital leaders, and sometimes we get into that mind trap that it takes the onus off of everybody else. It becomes, tell me when it's done, and then I will live in the change. And you actually have to become part of the change. And that's what we're seeing in pockets within the Government of Canada, which is great, because we can see areas where they're not just making ingredients, right? We've got digital credentials, we've got data, we've got cyber, we've got all of this. These are the ingredients, but they're building the kitchen, they're building the recipes through architecture, and they're actually making the difference to be able to make advancements. And they're doing this through not only courage, and that's a term that was used in several panels today around courage and caution, but they're doing it through curiosity and through commitment. And you have to be committed. This is not about simply dipping your toe in the water. If you commit yourself to the change, if you commit yourself to thinking differently, to freeing yourself from the mind trap, then what ends up happening is you could actually find ways of discovering new ways of doing things and new ways of collaborating with people. It's been done. And sometimes we get trapped by the fact that we can't even do it in our own department, yet it's being done successfully across jurisdictions. Think about BizPal 20 years ago. It's still running, and it was successful transformation across 3 levels of government. We can still do that because it has the anatomy of success. And we can apply the same anatomy because the governance is the brain, the leadership is the heart, policy and ledge is the nervous system, and business transformation is the metabolism that changes with everything around it. So if we can actually make that happen and we can do this in concert, it is not about fixing one thing, but you can start by fixing one problem at a time and using that as the blueprint to keep on moving forward with fixing a lot of the other issues that we're seeing. And there's, like I say, there's a lot of great leadership, a lot of great minds within that we've worked with in the Government of Canada, and I'm very excited to see what the future holds and see that we tackle a lot of the challenges ahead.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I like what you say there about maybe we shouldn't talk about digital transformation. This is about transformation, because so many of the sessions actually, we very much talked about broader change management, and it is about people and culture as much as it is about technology. And I also have written down here, commit to change. So are we all committed to change in this room, and how are we all working together? Because actually, if you talk about digital transformation, you let quite a few people off the hook, I think, and actually we all need to be coming together to see this change happen. Thank you so much. We have a good 20 minutes left. Great. We've got a hand coming straight up here, and we've got another hand there. And we have a hand from over this side of the room, which I've been waiting for today, which is fantastic. We haven't had that many over that side of the room. In fact, I can see lots of hands. So can we take 2 here first, then we'll go to 2 over that side, and then we'll do 2 in the middle, and that might be all that we have time for. Could you keep your hands up down here, please, so we can get the mics to you here? So these 2 here. I think we've only got a, have we got a mic here in the room, please? Thanks, running down here. Lady right at the front row, right in the front row, there we go. And then the gentleman at the back with the shirt. I don't know if we've got another mic in the room, but if you could, the gentleman behind, thanks, afterwards. Okay, over to you. I think it's on.
Let's see. Good afternoon. Bonjour. My name is Marie-Lou Moles, and I'm from Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. I've been dying to ask this question because I just don't know what it really means. In today's panel discussing cybersecurity for all, addressing all threats, evolving threats, they talked about how this government now, or this approach, is such an exciting moment because it's mission-driven, it has vision, it's mission-critical. And again, Monsieur Rochon, you talked about it, vision. But while it sounds very cool, and it sounds like a TikTok slogan, isn't it just semantics? Because it seems the government rebrands itself every 5 years. We've got Government 2.0, we've got 2025, 2030. So what makes it different this time? What's going to make it really stick?
Okay, great question, and very topical, because in the UK we've got a new government that's coming, and it's mission-led government. So, Dominic, would you like to respond to that? What makes it different, and how are we mission or vision-led?
So when are you speaking specifically about the cybersecurity strategy?
The government. Why did they say that in the UK? It said everybody in the government in Canada shared this mission. It said, this time we're mission-driven,
This time we're we're mission-critical, we're vision-critical, is that what?
Mission-driven. Mission-critical.
Mission-driven.
Mission-driven.
So, I'm not one for semantics, frankly. I've been at the public service for the better part of 25 years, so I've been through the cycle. And truth be told, government is very cyclical, particularly when it comes to the expenditure management cycle, where we have a budget, you allocate funds, you know, if you don't understand how government works, you come through a central agency, you have your 3 central agencies that ultimately approve policy, that allocate funding, then you have to come to Treasury Board Secretariat in Canada, and there you have to explain how you're going to spend those funds and how you're going to be able to demonstrate that you achieve what you want to achieve. So it's all very cyclical. And at the end of the day, for me, it's very comforting. I've worked in over half a dozen departments and agencies, and each of those agencies have their own culture, but that cycle and that understanding of how government works is replicated. when it comes to cybersecurity, I'll use that since you cited that very specifically. It just so happens that Scott Jones and I worked for the Communications Security Establishment for the better part of about 7 years. We overlapped together. And we were very busy in terms of maturing, setting up a cybersecurity center for which Scott Jones was the first head of for the federal government. And we had very specific views on how we were going to implement that. CSE, Shared Services Canada, the Treasury Board Secretariat now form a bit of a triumvirate in terms of how we're actually managing cybersecurity going forward. And what we've built on that foundation is allowing us then now to mature and do that even better. So is it mission driven specifically? For me, again, I would say those are semantics. I think that we're getting ever better at doing something like cybersecurity. I think we're getting better in terms of delivering on all things digital. But as we're getting better, we need to bring the whole federal public service along with us. And that's the biggest challenge, because when you're talking about 350, 400,000 public servants, there's an awareness piece, and it's not just the people that work in digital or the people that work in cybersecurity, because as you well know, we can have the most amazing cybersecurity strategy and rules in place and infrastructure in place to protect us. All it takes is one person clicking on the wrong thing at the wrong time, and we're vulnerable and we get exposed. So at the end of the day, are we going to continue to have 5-year plans, 10-year plans, new visions? Governments are going to fall, new governments are going to come in, and we're going to have new semantics and new ways of framing things. The key for me is, are we actually building foundational blocks upon which we can then continue to grow? And are we actually developing the digital skills that we need in order to sustain and continue to be able to deliver on what we need to deliver on?
Thanks, Dominic. I know we got lots of questions, but Paul, you wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, maybe just one thing to add on to that, and I think Dominic was kind of getting there at the end. From a mission perspective, I think, we're starting to have, if you go back, we had a minister, and notwithstanding, Stephen, your comment about digital, I agree with you, by the way. Digital is a bit of a Trojan horse, the good kind, if there can be one of those. But, it's where you can start talking about policy, culture, service, cyber. All of those elements are brought to the table to have a conversation about an outcome. And we had a Minister of Digital Government, Scott Bryson, who sort of started that conversation within the Canadian federal context. We've now moved to a Minister of Citizen Service. But the dialogue around digital and what it means to the citizens is happening from top to bottom in the organization. So I think that's one of the elements of mission. And I think just to close on this, the mission from a public service perspective, regardless of the color of government that happens to be in the day, we have a digital ambition within Canada, and the digital ambition is underpinned, it's focused on 2 main areas: service and trust. That's it. Now, there's a whole bunch of things that spin out from there. We've learned that's been an evolution. We used to have something called the Digital Operations Strategic Plan. How about that for a name? And it had all kinds of great things that departments had to do. You had to do this for your networks. You had to do this for your cybersecurity. It was not mission driven. It was outputs driven. Now we're talking about a mission around service and trust, and if you can start to create a narrative around that, that can actually transcend the political level and the bureaucratic level.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'll take it. 1 in the room, I'll take it. Thank you.
2, we need to get 4 out of 4 before we close this session. So gentlemen there, and then can we get the microphones in that area of the room for the next question? Thank you. It will come on, there's just a bit of a delay, thanks.
No. Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, so I've been working with the government of Canada only for the last 5 years. I used to be in academia. I used to work at CERN, the European Particle Physics Laboratory, and we created a large data analytics platform without any vendor. It was just in-house open source data. And moving to the government, it always struck to me why we need vendors to be, as you said, at the cutting edge of technology, whereas we could build capacity in our IT systems to be in the cutting edge ourselves. So not relying on vendors, but be the drivers of technological innovation in digital service. So my question is why are we not doing that? Why are we not filling our IT department with competencies to be able to produce our own solution and be less reliant on vendors to be able to develop these capacities?
Thank you. So the question, are we too reliant on vendors? Yes. Scott.
So I think there's a couple threads to pull on that. You know, I personally think, you know, we do need to strengthen our IT departments. We need to make sure that they've got the skills, but there's a lot of skills out there. Like, let's not pretend there aren't like large groups of really smart people across. The problem is that when you've got an entire loaf of bread and you have a tablespoon of peanut butter and you try to cover every piece of bread, you don't taste much peanut butter. That's a terrible analogy, but it's the only one I could come up with. But like, our problem is that we don't know how to bring our capacity to bear on the problems that matter because of the way, because I said the departmental silos earlier. The second thing I think we need to start doing is we need to start thinking about these not as IT projects that get funded. So, you know, we just heard about IRCC, and they're doing a project right now that it's actually the most exciting one that I'm watching in terms of what it could actually transform. But my question is, what happens in 3 or 4 years when it's done, and how do we sustain it? How do we sustain the momentum of transformation there? We have to change the structural pieces. So I think there are lots of smart people across the government. The problem is we're spending a lot of those resources are reinventing things. So back to my original point, those teams should be focused in on the pieces that are actually differentiating. So if you're using the example of a science organization, that's where they should be doing. When I was running the cyber center, I wanted my developers working on cutting edge, and in this case, really cutting edge cyber tools. I didn't want them deploying web servers and email services and all the other stuff that should be coming as part of standard IT. I want standard services there because I wanted them freed up to do the thing that mattered. Yeah, of course they wanted to play, but that's not what we were here for. And that's where I think we need to do. And so we divide our capacity too much. And so I think that's one of our fundamental issues. And then the second piece is we need to be willing to try some of those pieces. We need to be able to try to do something and to solve the problem, but then we have to share it with the rest of the government and say, hey, I've got this great idea. Now can we scale it? And how do we do that? And we're not very good at pull through. So great ideas that start from that really smart team. Pull through is a process, and it takes investment. And that's when perhaps the cycles that we go through and the multi-departmental governance processes start to, they just weigh us down. So I think we have to concentrate on pull through, but I also think we need to look at how do we free people up to work on the things that matter. And that's what we need to be really investing in.
Thanks, Scott. Right, we take 2 questions from over here. If you could put your hand up, the questions over there. Keep your hand up and we get the microphone. Thank you. Yes, question there.
Hi. So this panel is about the future of digital in the government, and what I see are 4 white men. And I'm just wondering, so my question is, who are the women, either in your organization or elsewhere in government, that you think are representing the women, or are representing the future of digital as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely no disrespect to the great men that we have on the panel here. And we have had brilliant women throughout the day as well. But who would like to respond to this in terms of the future and where are the great women?
So we actually talked about this. We looked at each other and we said, crap, it's a mantle. And we were doing that back there. And, you know, I almost pulled out for that exact reason, because I have amazing women ADMs that could easily be up here speaking about this with as much passion, as much knowledge as I am. But on the other hand, I committed to this panel to do it. But you're absolutely right. Like, this is not the representative panel, at least for the 3 of us. I won't speak for Stephen here, but the 3 of us, like, we're just 3 people that happened to be in the jobs at the time. But I will tell you, like, that's exactly what we need to be working on. We need to be working on highlighting the vast experience and diversity that's out there in the rest of the government, and particularly in digital leadership. But I can tell you, like, I could jump off this stage right now and I could give you a list of people that would fill the entire front row of this room without even, it wouldn't even take a half a second to go through the list for me. It's a long, 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 long list, and it's all like, so yes, you're right.
Can I broaden that question out a little bit as well? Sorry, Dominic, and say, because there have been concerns around kind of AI and the impact of AI and potential biases being built into algorithms and things like that. Do you think there's an issue around the diversity of the public sector workforce in general, and do we need to be doing more to make sure that the workforce is as representative as possible of the citizens that we serve? Sorry, Dominic, you were going to come in.
I think the simple answer is yes, we always have to be doing more. That being said, I replaced a woman 8 months ago. Catherine Luella was in my job. And since I've gotten into the job, I've made a point of trying to meet every single CIO and CTO and Chief Digital Officer across the federal government. It's been a journey. I think I've met about 75 at this point. I still have about another 35 to go. There's a significant amount of women, extraordinary women, and in fact, I've seen many of them here today, whether they were on stage. Elise Lejeune, for example, was here. People that are chief data officers, CIOs, so lots of women, lots of visible minorities, extraordinary people. And I certainly don't get the sense that we're not well represented in that area, but I do think that we always need to be making those efforts. I think it's going to need to be a continued effort to make sure that we're promoting, that we're highlighting, and clearly when there are panels when 3 white males show up, we typically get this sort of question, and it's not surprising. And we need to do a better job of promoting women and visible minorities.
Thanks. Thank you. Good challenge. Great question. So another question that we have over that side of the room. I think, yeah. Thank you.
Hello, Nathaniel Black. I'm a student with the Canada Border Services.
I'm not sure the microphone's working. I can't hear that one. Thanks.
Okay, my name is Nathaniel Black. I'm a student with the Canada Border Services Agency, and I'm also 23. And I noticed that there is an innate versus a learned digital literacy that is really hard to grasp within the civil service, especially given that our organizations run on hierarchy. And so as a result, I think there is a missing link in the conversation with regard to the distinction between digitalization versus digitization. And my manager puts it succinctly in saying that this is not the 90s or the early 2000s where putting something on a fillable PDF qualifies as a digital public service to the public. So I think I want to ask the question in the form of cost-benefit analysis. As a young person, social media is a large factor in my life, and we're willing to provide large sums of data to social media companies in order to receive a service back that is highly personalized. We have profiles. So what is that cost-to-benefit analysis that's being conducted on a senior level to sort of think, okay, what is the data and information that we can use that we have in our organizations, but also how can we make a pitch to Canadians, young Canadians, to provide the government that type of information and data in one solid location and provide them with a personalized experience? Thank you.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpick in that question, I think. So are we digitalizing or just digitizing? So are we digitizing bad processes rather than fundamentally transforming services? And also there was the issue around how can we really reach out and get the data that we need from our citizens to get the insights that we need to improve those services? A lot in that question. Who would like to start on this one?
Well, let me start, and then maybe others will jump in here. So I think you touched on one thing around digital literacy that I think is really important, in terms of not only from a federal public service within the federal family, but I think, there's work that we can do around digital literacy for citizens, Canadian businesses, and those that are looking to come to the country, and what digital means. And I think it was in the Ukraine presentation. It says we don't want to digitize chaos. And I think, there's an element of that in terms of the work that we do and the kind of services that we set up. I think there's back to the trust service model of the digital ambition, that trust piece is earned. And I don't think it's something where you can just start and say, well, it's the government of Canada, you trust us. And because we've seen the trust scores over the past, let's call it even just a half decade, go up and down. I think to your point, it's important for us to look at you know, whether it's the cost benefit, I think it's probably even more sophisticated than cost benefit. It's cost benefit and trust, and starting those conversations with some of the services where you can easily transfer information, easily share information, and have a better user experience, and show what right looks like when it comes to leveraging, you know, people's personal data, and the way we do it in a way that's respectful, the way that respects privacy and cyber. I think that becomes a stepping stone, but I don't think, you know, starting with, you know, whether it's taxes or social benefits programs, that is where you start to erode trust, because you're aiming too high almost. And so I think there's an element of digital literacy that we have to do. We do a good job actually from a Government of Canada perspective in a cyber sense, but we haven't done it yet in a service sense, and I think that's going to be one of the next frontiers.
Maybe if I can just add onto that. So the comment on digital versus digitalization, or analog, or digitalizing an analog process. You know, I've said in a few other public settings, if the Government of Canada was Amazon, our inventory would be in a PDF. You'd call a 1-800 number, and we wouldn't know if it was in stock because it would be in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere. And that's one of the things we have to think through. And that's, again, when we talk about the silos across departments, there's silos inside of departments. The IT department is separate from the finance department, is separate from the policy people. And when you come and you want to redo your program, I guarantee you that's not how you design a process to work in a modern world. So breaking down that barrier, but also that means all of us need to meet partway, right? And stop this level of superiority that comes from those different silos. We're coming to the table with different levels of excellence. On the piece about trust, though, I think the thing with social media is we're the product, first of all, and so, but it's entertaining. So, you know, I get all my little reels of cats, so I'm happy, and I'm continuing to let them know what I'm engaged with, etc. But we're the product there. In the government sense, no, I'm getting a service, and inherently, I think we need to meet it with, we have to think about how do we explain to people exactly what we're doing in a way that gets rid of frankly, the conspiracy theory versions of what these services are being used for. Because if we're going to collect that data, citizens deserve to know what it's for, because unlike, you know, a particular vendor, I can opt out. You can't opt out of dealing with the Government of Canada, which means we have to think about that. We have to think about transparency, and how are we transparent from the start? And right now, I would say we're not doing great.
Thanks, Scott. And the importance of transparency and communication has come up as themes throughout the day. Can we bring the mics to this session? I said we'd take 2 from the middle section as well, section. But Stephen, did you want to come in on that last question?
Sure. Yeah, I think, you know, the question of digitalization versus digitization, I mean, when we think about, and Scott was talking about doing things out in the open with transparency, and if you were at a session earlier where Alex Bonet about PSPC and Next Gen HR and Pay, that everything is being actually released out into the open, and it's fully transparent. Perfect example of how things should be done. And when we talk about the digitalization, this is talking about a rethink of how we do things. And if we're rethinking it, we have to make sure that the right people are in the room when we rethink. We need the diversity, we do need the multidisciplinary teams, we need the clients, real clients in the room when we rethink, because that's how we're going to be able to become digital instead of just do digital. And there is a difference, because we've watched too many times different departments doing digital with people who are actually frontline experts. Now, the frontline experts, absolutely love them, treasure trove of information, but as soon as they become a proxy for a real client, the mind trap sets in again, and they are actually producing biases within the new process that actually shouldn't be there. But if we had real clients within a multidisciplinary, multi-diversity team, then we are actually going to find ways to create the digitalization that's going to make the difference. So that's just kind of some thoughts just based on my observations.
Fantastic. We have 6 minutes left of this panel, and we've got 2 questions. So I'm going to take both the questions, and then you can choose which one you answer. But questioners, could you keep your questions as succinct as possible? We've got somebody right at the back, I believe, with a mic. We'll take your question, and then this lady here with the grey jacket. So we'll hear both questions. Thanks.
Hi, it's Shamima from OCIO. It's been a great day so far. We've heard about putting the user at the center of things. We've talked about culture change. We've talked about all of these great things that we know we can do. The problem is, I've heard these things before, many times. What are you going to do to make sure we tackle these so that we hear different things in future editions of this conference? Thanks.
Fantastic. So a bit of frustration there maybe. What's different this time? What's going to make it happen this time? And the lady here.
Hi. I expected this conference to be about what we're going to do internally to get through transformation or whatever. But the one thing I hoped would be touched on, and it hasn't been at all as far as I can tell, is we have to make decisions quite often about our stakeholders, about the clients we deal with who are using AI. We have to make decisions about whether, like, if we're holding someone personally accountable for something, how do you hold AI accountable? It's, I guess, the account holder. We're looking at websites right now. I'm with IRCC, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. So we're looking at websites right now that are giving immigration information. We know a lot of it is fueled by AI. We've got concerns because it goes against Section 91 of IRPA, which is about representation. So I guess the other side of the coin, I find we're so far behind. I've been rattling this cage for a while in my unit to say we can't ignore what's going on out there, but how do you say to a government that's so focused on its own transformation that you cannot ignore, like you can't ignore the trebuchets on the other side of the wall. You've got to keep your eyes within and outward facing as well. So I don't know if just generally anybody has something to say about that.
Okay, so I think I'm going to paraphrase slightly. So the first question very much about what's different, and the second question I think is, are we too focused on internal transformation and maybe not lifting our eyes enough and looking at what's the impact maybe of some of the decisions that we're making or some things that are already going on with AI in the world around us? We have 3.5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of you your thoughts, and you can answer one or both questions. Dominic, I'll start with you.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. And to the previous person, the first person that asked the question is one of the leading women that works for me in OCIO, so there you go. I look forward to her progressing in her career. And her question's a good one, but what I will say in terms of both questions, I'll answer them both in the following way. I think we need to identify what are the ingredients that we need in order to be able to adapt as we move forward. What I mean by ingredients, and we've been talking about it, and it's not just hearsay, it's about making sure that we deal with our technical debt, that we prioritize where we want to invest, that we recruit the right people, and that recruitment is not just hiring people, it's actually having the right career path and nurturing the type of people that we need along the way, and that requires a lot of discipline and a lot of effort in order to be able to manage people's careers. And with regard to the AI question, it's about having the right guardrails in place. We have introduced a directive on automated machine decision-making. We've put in place a mandatory algorithmic impact assessment that needs to take place if you're going to be using these sorts of things. And you need to have a data strategy in place in order to be able to deliver on using AI. If you don't have all of these ingredients, you're not going to succeed. And it might sound mundane, but you have to wake up every day, roll up your sleeves, and actually deliver on these things. Not just use words, but every time you show up at a meeting, we have an abundance of governance. You have to keep repeating these things, and it's all about a change management approach to changing the culture, changing the way we do things, but investing in those ingredients.
Thanks. I'm going to mix up the order a little bit. So Stephen, your thoughts on either of those?
Yeah, thank you. I'll take a quick poll. 20 years ago, 2004, what position was the Government of Canada in the world in e-government at the time? Just show me with a number of fingers. Yes, I see one. Good. We were #1 in the world 20 years ago. Same number of fingers. What position are we today?
Not enough.
Yeah, exactly. You could take off your shoes and socks. We wouldn't be able to say. But when I saw Yuri up there be so proud and even use the term European transformation tiger, tells me that they went into beast mode when it came to transformation. And that when you talk about what we need to do to reverse the slide and what we need to do to not have this conversation 20 years from now saying we're going to do the same things, we need to get into beast mode. And whatever that means, it means whatever it takes to actually remove barriers that are persistent, and they have been persistent for the last 20 years to stop us from actually moving as much as we can. There's been great work so far, and there's been a lot of sweat equity put into this, which means there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of building blocks that we can continue to build upon, but we need to do that in a coordinated manner. More coordinated means that we can get into beast mode a lot faster. So I'll just end it there.
Brilliant, thank you. So, Paul, I'm going to ask you to follow beast mode. What would you like to add?
Fantastic, thank you. So Shamima, I'm going to start with your question. I think, leadership and action, and it doesn't mean the people up here. We've taken some action. You got 4 people up here who are passionate talking about digital transformation. When you take action, you get some things wrong. Should there have been a woman sitting up here amongst us? Absolutely. But we're up here talking about something that's we're passionate about, something that we want to change. And I think that's true within the federal public service. Having the leadership right now that is focused on action as opposed to establishing a policy, coming up with the next strategy, actually making some changes and not getting it right every time. And being in beast mode, sometimes you fall down, or at least I would if I was doing that. But I think you're seeing what's different now, and we'll talk 12 months from now, is action. And I think you're seeing action on a lot of different fronts, whether that's cloud, whether that's even in policy development. My friends over at TBS, they're doing things in a lot quicker turnaround than they used to, which used to be measured in terms of decades as opposed to maybe weeks or months. And certainly, plug from a Canadian Digital Service perspective, the work that we're doing around digital credentials and single sign-in, it's action. We're doing it. It's being built. It's not PowerPoint presentations and arm waving. So we'll talk in a year and see if those actions have come to fruition. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul. And Scott, the clock is ticking, so the final words go to you.
The clock is ticked. Okay. So what are we doing differently? You're absolutely right. I've heard this before. In fact, I've heard myself saying things that I heard other people on this stage years ago say. Fundamentally, we're driving on the process side. The bureaucratic immune system is incredibly powerful to go back to the way things have always been done. And that means you have to stay concentrating on a few things and getting them right and cleaning them up. Our problem is we spread ourselves too thin and then we move away from the problem. For those of you who are old enough and remember Circus of the Stars, there was always somebody who did the spinning plate thing. And that's how we do digital in the government. We run from spinning plate, and when it starts to wobble, we hope we get back there before it smashes on the ground. And I'm saying, no, let's figure out how to fix a couple fundamental pieces and get it right. And so, I can't believe, I hate talking about Wi-Fi, but that's one of the places we started because, frankly, there's no point going in and doing any work when you can't actually connect in a remote way. And so we cleaned up the process. You probably don't know that about 95% of our process was just negotiating with departmental CIOs. It wasn't the install, it wasn't buying the equipment, it wasn't doing anything like that. So we're fundamentally changing that. And we're trying to put that through all of our processes to start to speed up delivery and to get rid of some of these barriers. And then, that's the first step, but then you've got to come forward and say, does this even make sense? Is there a better way of delivering this? And questioning how we're doing it. But, you should ask us that next year, too. What's different? What's changed? And hold us to account. That's one of the reasons I'm here. I believe that in my job, I should be up here answering questions. And that's one of the reasons why I think we're all here. So.
Brilliant.
With that, I'll turn it back.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you to all of you for answering those questions so honestly and so openly. To the audience, don't go anywhere, but please join me in a really warm round of applause for our final panel of the day.